Okay, so I feel like maybe we can just go ahead and get started, and then as people show up, they'll show up.
Okay, sounds great.
Okay. Yeah, everyone, this is Elizabeth Delgadillo Talburt, a previous ASGSR president, actually, for the student committee. We're really excited to have her here, and normally I would go give her a little bio, but she's going to talk about that plenty herself. Just a quick overview. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat. Liz, would you prefer if people, like if we wait to the end for people to answer questions or like to answer questions, or are you okay doing it as we go along?
Yeah, I'll answer questions at the end, but if you
Okay.
have questions that pop up during the presentation, feel free to type them out in the chat and then I'll address them at the end of the presentation.
Okay, yeah, perfect. So I'll just let you take it away then.
Thanks, Marshall. So again, hi everyone, good morning. My name is Elizabeth Delgadillo Talburt, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about my experience navigating through the space industry as a student and then as in early career. So this presentation, I wanted to emphasize that there's a lot of paths to get into the space industry and that you don't need to follow a particular route or timeline to be successful in the industry. And again, there's just a lot of options. And a lot of this I didn't know until I was already kind of partway through my undergrad degree. So I wanted to share it all with you since I was just there a couple of years ago. So a little bit about me. Here's my email if you do have any questions that you think of after this presentation, or if you want to connect. I'm currently working as a project engineer on NASA's Human Health and Performance contract over at Johnson Space Center. I started off my space industry career as a NASA intern in 2017. I was part of the volunteer internship program. So that was an unpaid internship, but it was a great networking opportunity and really kind of launched my career in the space industry was through that first internship. I was also a Space Life Sciences Training Program Research Associate in 2018 and returned to the Space Life Sciences Training Program in the summer of 2019 as a staffer. As Marshall mentioned, I was part of the student board. I joined in 2018 and was a board member from 2018 to 2020, and then served as the ASGSR student board president from 2020 to 2021. I'm now currently part of the ASGSR Education and Outreach Professional Board as a committee member. In terms of education, I started off my bachelor's degree in bioengineering at Santa Clara University, but I ended up finishing at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University with a Bachelor of Science in Engineering and a minor in math in 2020. My interests are bioastronautics, medical operations and microgravity, environmental health, and health maintenance hardware. That first picture on the left is me working on a microbial sampling kit that was sent up to the ISS. That rocket is NG-14. It's a Northrop Grumman Cygnus rocket and was the first launch that had hardware that I built sent up to the International Space Station. So that picture is pretty near and dear to my heart. And then that last photo is of an astronaut using the optical coherence tomography 2 or OCT2 instrument, which is used to monitor astronaut eye health on the ISS. And that's one of the instruments that I currently maintain in my role as a project engineer at Johnson Space Center. So how did I get here? There's a lot of paths to get into the space industry. This isn't an exhaustive list, but I've listed a couple that I've seen through internships and through my current position. I think the most common one that I hear people going down is this life sciences undergraduate, graduate school, postdoc, and then entering in the space industry as a principal investigator or a PI. And it's a great path to take if that's your path, but it's not the only one that's out there. I personally was more on this leg of undergrad engineering, doing internships and my undergrad design project, and then entering the space industry. but there's a lot of iterations combining these paths together. For example, a former PI that I worked with had an engineering undergraduate degree and then had his PhD in biology and was working sort of at the intersection of those two fields as a PI. I've also met many people with liberal arts degrees from undergrad that work in the space industry. One of the friends that I made at an internship was, I believe, an English major, and he's doing science communication at NASA Ames Research Center. But I've also met people that had degrees in history or library sciences that work as archivists as well through NASA. So there's there's a lot of ways to make your interests work and align in the space industry. I've also seen people who pursued a STEM associate's degree, transferred to a four-year university, and then ended up working in the space industry after graduation as well. So there's a lot of different ways to get into the industry. It's not all just rocket science like I first thought when I was in college. And I just really wanted to emphasize that there are many paths and many combinations of paths to take in order to get into the space industry. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a linear journey in order to make it. And with that, I'll get into a little bit about how I ended up working at NASA. So in 2014, so I started my undergraduate degree at Santa Clara University. I was a bioengineering major on the biomolecular track. I was interested in using tissue engineering as a vehicle for drug development and testing, as well as therapeutics for genetic disorders, which is a lot different than what I ended up doing now. In the summer of my third year at Santa Clara, I applied to about 15 internships, and I ended up only being accepted to one. This is not to scare anyone, but just to kind of emphasize that like there is a lot of work that goes on in the background for every success that you see. And I ended up applying to an internship at NASA Ames Research Center with the Space Biosciences Division, kind of on a whim, because one of my classmates had a sticker of the Space Biosciences Division logo, and I thought it looked interesting. So I struck up a conversation, asked what the sticker meant, and ended up finding an internship available for that summer. And that was the one that I got, luckily. So during that internship in 2017, I examined specimens that were stored in the Ames Life Science Data Archive Biobank. So there were tissue samples that were held from back in 1991 all the way up until 2017. And I was looking at tissue degradation over time in biobanks. And through this internship, I really developed an interest in space and the impact of microgravity on organisms, and kind of changed the trajectory of my college journey. In all honesty, after that internship, I had a little bit of an existential and a career crisis. I really liked the university that I was going to, but the emphasis was more on biological research and less on the instrumentation. And I wanted to get more into the nitty-gritty of the instrumentation. How do you design these instruments for this biological testing and experimentation? And so I ended up transferring universities as a third-year student. I transferred to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University with a engineering major and a mathematics minor. And so this was a big step to take, a scary step to take, but it ended up working out well in the long run. Yeah, so that internship really kind of launched my interest in the space industry. And I did a lot of networking when I was there because I knew I really wanted to return and I wanted to make a career out of that. So luckily through that networking, I was invited to apply to the Space Life Sciences training program for the summer of 2018. And during that internship, I explored the impact of radiation and microgravity on mechanotransductive pathways in mesenchymal stem cells, which is a bit of a mouthful, but the main gist of it was we were looking at bone loss and in microgravity. And mesenchymal stem cells are pluripotent stem cells that can differentiate into bone cells, fat, muscle, tissue. So we were looking at what what is the impact of radiation and microgravity on their ability to differentiate into bone cells. And during that internship, I think I got a little more comfortable with the idea of I really want to work in the space industry, but I still hadn't figured out exactly what I wanted to do and how I fit in yet. And during that summer, I also joined the ASGSR student board when I attended the annual conference, which I would highly recommend attending conferences, the ASGSR conference or any space conference really. During that time, I did a presentation on my research from that summer, but I also went through the poster sessions and as many talks as I could to kind of figure out what exactly am I interested in and what do I want to do with my career. So I took that conference time not only to present my work, but also to check out what other people were working on and what other opportunities there were in the space industry. And what I could see myself doing in the long term. After that internship, I was encouraged to apply as an SLSTP staffer, again, through networking connections. And in the summer of 2019, I returned to Ames as an SLSTP staffer and part-time research associate. During that summer, I worked on continuing the development of an automated and optimized RNA extraction platform used for the ISS and for other future spacecraft. And that was kind of when I had my eureka moment and I finally figured out what I wanted to do in the industry and what I wanted to make a career out of. And that was engineering hardware and instruments specifically for biological applications in microgravity. So it took me about 3 internships and transferring universities, but eventually I got there and I kind of ran with it. For my senior design, I kind of tailored our design project towards something that was applicable in the space industry. So we designed a CO2 removal system as part of a portable life support system. And it was a great design experience. And it was also fun because once I did get my full-time job, I worked for a couple of months on doing acceptance testing for the laser air monitor or LAM that's going to go on the Orion spacecraft, which is going to the moon. So there was a cool little tie-in to what I did as an undergrad later on in my career, which was really fulfilling to see. So if you are able to, and if you have design projects, I highly recommend tailoring those design projects to the industry that you want to work in. From 2019 to 2020, I had my great senior year job search. I started applying for positions, I think, in November of my senior year. I applied for, I think, over 20 positions in the aerospace industry. Again, not to scare anyone, but just to emphasize that like on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and a lot of social media, you see the success, but you don't really see all of the rejections that happen in the background. And you only really need one in order to get your career started. And I was lucky enough to receive an interview at Johnson Space Center and was hired on for NASA's Human Health and Performance contract in March of 2020. So I actually started working full-time before I graduated college, which was really exciting. And in part, it was kind of a relief that I had a job lined up before graduating, but it was also difficult to finish up senior design and exams and assignments and stuff while also working full time. And in 2020, I graduated from Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, started to think about grad school, but decided that I think I need more time in the industry for the time being. I'm not discounting grad school. I think in a couple of years, I'll probably apply for grad school, but having time in the industry, at least for me personally, has been able to kind of narrow down even more what I want to do, what I would like to research, and where I want the trajectory of my career to go. After graduation was also when I joined the ASGSR professional committee, and it's been a great way to kind of keep involved with the greater space community and interact with people that are doing research that might not necessarily be in my field that I would see every day going into work. So highly recommend volunteer organizations, student groups, and professional organizations for the networking and for the opportunities, but also as a way to kind of figure out what you want to do in the industry. So I showed you my path. Now I'm going to talk about where it took me. So again, I'm a project engineer on NASA's Human Health and Performance contract. I work on human systems engineering, specifically the crew healthcare system, or CHECS. And within CHECS, I maintain hardware and build hardware for the health maintenance systems and the environmental health systems. So I'm a government contractor. I'm not a NASA civil servant. I don't work directly for NASA. I'm under KBR's contract as a subcontractor through Aegeus Aerospace. The contractor relationship can be a little bit confusing, but NASA essentially contracts out their projects. So they kind of they set a goal and set requirements for certain projects, and then they allow private companies to bid on being the workforce for that project. And so that's how I got to this point, is by being a government contractor. So a little bit about the health maintenance system and what exactly it looks like to be a project engineer. So I maintain hardware that's on the International Space Station as one leg of my job. And these are enabling technologies to research spaceflight associated neuro-ocular syndrome. In microgravity, there's a fluid shift upwards in your body due to the fact that your circulatory system doesn't have to fight against gravity in order to pump blood and other fluids to the upper half of your body. And in this fluid shift, it causes kind of a change in the eye shape, which over time can cause thickening of the retina. So with long-term space flight, it is a concern for astronaut health, and it's closely monitored to make sure that there isn't any long-term issues with vision as a facet of having been up on the International Space Station. And two ways that we monitor astronaut eye health are with ocular coherence tomography, or the OCT2, as well as fundoscopy, which is another method of retinal imaging. And the instrument for that is called the fundoscope. So these two images are of OCT2. It uses sound waves to take cross-sectional images of the retina, similar to like what an ultrasound would be, but for the eye. And I have a ground version of this instrument at my desk at work. And if there's any issues on orbit, I'm able to take it apart, put it back together, try to troubleshoot and see what might exactly be prompting that specific error code or that behavior. And back in 2021, we were having a reoccurring error that was interrupting eye exams and causing data loss. So part of my job was to work with the manufacturer of the device and my own personal device, and figure out what steps we could do to troubleshoot this issue and correct it on orbit. So myself and the engineering team spent a lot of time taking apart our ground unit, figuring out the safest way to do a reroute and fix some of these internal components in a way that they could do that would be feasible on the space station. And after a lot of board presentations and discussions, we came up with a troubleshooting plan that was enacted at towards the end of, I believe, 2021. And so the picture in the middle is of astronaut Soichi Noguchi. When we were doing that troubleshooting, there's always something that's going to happen on orbit that you don't account for on the ground. It's just kind of the nature of the beast. So on the ground, we had a certain L wrench that worked to take apart the spectrometer of the OCT2. However, on orbit, that same sized wrench only took off 4 of the 6 screws that we needed to get this spectrometer open and perform the troubleshooting. So you could see Soichi in good spirits with a whole bunch of wrenches, like all of the wrenches that they had for that particular shape. And as he was trying to unscrew the device so we could perform the troubleshooting. And for this activity, for my part of it, we supported from the Mission Control Center in one of their multi-purpose rooms to provide live feedback for any issues that they came up with during this activity. So it was really interesting to see in real time them working on our hardware and trying to fix this issue. Eventually we were successful and we were able to restore the OCT2 back to operational status, and it's currently working still on orbit. Just a couple of weeks ago, they did their eye exams as well. So that's probably one of my favorite parts of this job is being able to support a lot of the ISS activities. Another aspect of my current job is working on the environmental health system. So I build, resupply flight hardware as well as maintain systems on orbit. We do a lot of microbial sampling to monitor the health of the station and in turn the health of the astronauts. So we have contact slides as part of our surface sampler kit. It's an agar or a growth plate that you press against different surfaces and different instruments on the ISS, and then check for bacterial and fungal growth, just to have a profile of the microbial load that's up on the space station. Similarly, we build Petri dish packets for the microbial air sampler, which is a cylindrical device that pulls in air to run across the top of a Petri dish and sample any microbes that might be floating in the air that way. In addition to microbial sampling, we also look at volatile organic compounds. So anything that might be off-gassing in the space station. So some compounds of interest are benzene, ethanol, acetone, again, just for the general safety of the space station. And for that, we have a suite of hardware. I worked on the grab sample containers for some time, which are evacuated cylinders that have a vacuum pulled on them. And once they're flown up to the space station, the vacuum is broken with an actuator and air from the ISS cabin is pulled in. And those canisters are returned back to Johnson Space Center, where we do analysis to determine what, if any, volatile organic compounds are present in the ISS cabin air. We also have an air quality monitor, which is a shoebox sized device that has a gas chromatography column that's also used to detect volatile organic compounds. And we monitor water quality. So the ISS has a recycle and reclaim water system that recycles about 93% of water on the space station. And so with that continued recycling of water from I don't know, from hygiene, from the water that you drink. We want to make sure that it's still safe for the astronauts to be continuing to drink this water. So I build kits that have a suite of different types of sampling, from microbial also to just contaminants. And we also have the colorimetric water quality monitoring kit, which does similar work to the water kit, but is more specifically looking at iodine for when the system is flushed out. So a lot of this work involves building hardware and building consumables on the ground, sending it up to station, or monitoring hardware that's already on orbit and responding to any issues or errors that may occur. The ISS is over 20 years old now, so some of the hardware is older, and with age naturally comes some errors that might pop up. So we have ground hardware that are duplicates of what's on station in order to help troubleshoot and determine what might be going on and what might be causing errors on station, if any. Here are some results from the surface sampler kit that I talked about in the previous slide. So these slides are used to take samples from various surfaces. They're incubated and allowed to grow. And so this is a result from a fungal slide. And in the next picture, a little bit blurry, but the two instruments that are highlighted in red are the air quality monitors. And so those are operating, they're constantly on, and they record real-time data of the air quality in the ISS cabin. And that data is downlinked to Johnson Space Center where it's examined. And we look at the data logs, the engineering logs to make sure that everything is functioning correctly, as health hardware is really important to the space station, just because we want to make sure if there was anything of interest or anything of potential danger that we could catch it immediately and figure out the source to maintain astronaut health. So some tips that I have for students from my own experience, while you're still in school, I highly recommend joining clubs and volunteer organizations. I'm a little bit biased, so I recommend ASGSR. It's been a great networking and opportunity and brought up a lot of great opportunities for me. There's also the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics, the Space Generation Advisory Council, the Committee on Space Research. These are just a couple. It's not an exhaustive list, but if your interest is with space, then it's a great idea to join a club or an organization to get the latest news and internship opportunities and kind of see what's going on in the field and what are people looking at. If there aren't any specific clubs at your university, there are these national and international organizations that you can join that are away from the university. When I was first in school, I think I was looking specifically at clubs that my university offered and not really looking at these organizations that weren't specifically affiliated with the university. And so I wish I would have looked outward like that sooner, and I would have found these organizations sooner. So that's a big tip from my end. Also, to tailor your research and your design projects to the field that you want to work in if you can. A great way to do this is senior design if you're an engineer, undergraduate research, or internship opportunities. And also just, it takes time. Don't be discouraged if you're not sure exactly what you want to do. And if you don't know what you want your specialty to be. Like I said, it took me about 3 internships and transferring universities to find my place. I know that's a rather extreme example, but I just want to emphasize that you don't need to know exactly what you want to research or exactly what you want to work on right now. Just start with the broad strokes. If you're interested in plants and microgravity, start looking there. If you're interested in hardware and microgravity, attend talks, read papers on that field, and then you can narrow down your interest from there through either organizations or through internships, like I mentioned. And you don't need to finish school in a set time period to be successful. I know there's a lot of emphasis on going straight from undergrad into a PhD program, which is a great path, and I have a lot of friends that did that and are happy with that. But if you're unsure about graduate research, it could be helpful to take some time in the industry to narrow down your interests, as well as the fact that grad school is very difficult. It's hard to get into. If you don't get selected in your first round of applying, don't be discouraged. I know plenty of people that have applied several years or several years in a row before they got into grad school and ended up getting into really, really great schools. So just again, I know it's there's kind of a stress and pressure to get into the industry or finish college a certain way, but it doesn't have to be. Like, it took me 6 years to finish undergrad, and I think I'm still doing pretty well. So it's okay to take a breather. It's okay to not know exactly what you want to do. Just treat conferences like speed dating for your career and trying to figure out what exactly your niche might be. And you could find it while you're in grad school or while you're doing research, because projects kind of tend to evolve over time. So that is all I have. And I'm open to questions. I see there's a couple in the chat. Someone asked if I worked with Cassie. I was not in Cassie's lab, but I did meet her. She was working in the same building as I was. I think that was Kiernan who asked that question. Kristen asks, how how far are we in research and application of engineering technologies for epithelial nerve shaded color frequencies and the ability to see vision as fundamentally echoed as opposed to emissions to the actual eye? So I don't specifically work on epithelial nerve shaded color frequencies in that research, but there is a lot of research being done specifically on eye health and changes to the eye and microgravity. I'll put my email back up. If you would like to email me about that question, there are some great PIs that I work with specifically for SANS, and I could pass your question along to them and see if they have any additional insight on that. But yes, ocular health is a well-studied topic, especially on the ISS. So there should be an answer to your question, and I can get that for you if you'd like to email me. Let's see, what did the application process look like for my current role? So for the job that I currently have, I found the job posting, I believe, on Indeed. And it was kind of a general job posting for working and supporting hardware on station. I applied, I think, around December or January, and I heard back in February for an interview. So it started with a phone screening, and with a lot of these, with a lot of these job processes, it'll start with a phone screening by a technical recruiter, and they'll ask you some generalized questions to kind of get a feel for your knowledge base. And from there, if they're satisfied with how you answer the questions, they'll set up a meeting with the actual engineering team or with the team that you'd be working with, and you go through another interview that's less of the broad technical questions and more specific to their projects and their applications, and seeing if you have applicable experience that could translate well into that project. So for this position, I drew a lot from my Space Life Sciences training program summer projects, and a little bit for my senior design project in order to answer their questions. So if you are able to do internships, it could be a great way to supplement your knowledge base through interviews, because some of these questions, I think, I didn't necessarily study as much through my degree, but I did have a lot of exposure through internship opportunities. And are we procuring water from CH4 as yet? For the water reclamation system, I can send you additional information on that. Off the top of my head, I'm not familiar with what the specific method is for how they recycle the water. But again, I can get that information to you and answer it in an email. Is it possible to get involved with space research being international? Yes, it is. There's a lot of, so the next question is asking about if international students can participate in space research projects. And on NASA's internship page, I believe there's a link specifically for international students. So there are a lot of projects that you could do through NASA or through other space organizations that are tailored towards international students. One of my coworkers as well is from Canada, and she works on our same contract. And the great thing about NASA is that there are other countries that have offices at Johnson Space Center that work and collaborate here in the US. Another follow-up question, is it limited to only certain countries? So some of the, in terms of space organizations, I guess it is limited to certain countries, but for students looking for internships, I've seen people from a multitude of countries. There are a lot of opportunities for international students. So I would, I can, if you want to send me an email, I can send you a link to the page that specifically lists out international opportunities. Through my different internships, I worked with a lot of different students from, some were from India. I think one was from somewhere in the Caribbean, people from Spain. So there are opportunities for international students in the space industry. Let's see. Now that NASA has announced that ISS will be decommissioned in 2031, how will that change the scope of research with the dependency of commercial partners? That's a great question. So yes, the ISS will be decommissioned in 2031. And a lot of what they were using the ISS for was microgravity research, as well as kind of testing out equipment for future platforms. So we've been in contact with certain private sector commercial companies asking if they could use some of our checks hardware to see if it would fit with their health plans and astronaut health monitoring. So the ISS has really served as a foundation for the next steps in space exploration. And we've learned a lot of lessons with the instrumentation that we've chosen and with how they've aged throughout the years. So I think these specific technologies will probably be either expanded on or translated directly into future platforms, which is really exciting to see. And since they've been there for so long, we've learned limitations and we've learned what happens when this hardware ages and where we could make improvements to increase the longevity of this type of hardware. So I think with the future of commercial partners and other platforms, there's going to be a lot of collaboration between government entities and their commercial counterparts. Yeah, so we're currently working with, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say which partners, but we're currently working with commercial partners in helping them establish what they want to do for their health maintenance systems or their environmental health systems, and how they can use this technology or what technology we would recommend as a replacement for some of these pieces of hardware. Another question. I want to go to grad school and work on closed ecological life support systems, but many universities require graduate students to be funded. Either the professor has grant money to support you or you bring grant money yourself. What's the best place to find funding for graduate research? This is a good question. So we've been working on a list of fellowship opportunities, also funding opportunities on the ASGSR side as sort of a resource for people associated with ASGSR or people that come across our website. The NSF has a pretty great graduate grant. I think you can only apply to it once, but I've known a couple of people that have gotten that grant. There's also funding through NASA, so you can get your research funded through NASA as well. And in terms of the best place to find graduate research funding, keep an eye out on your email. I think there should be something sent within the next month about a list of resources and places to look for graduate funding. We've been kind of working in the background, collecting and compiling a list of resources for students, but that is a great question. Oh, and then someone answered in the chat about US grants for the question about international student research. Another question, you've done a lot of interesting things. What's been your favorite project so far? So I guess my two favorite projects have been the OCT2, so the one that was having issues on orbit, as well as the air quality monitor, because it's also having issues on orbit. I know from an engineering standpoint, it is difficult and frustrating when hardware isn't behaving as expected, but from a personal perspective, I like the puzzle of trying to figure out what exactly is going on. And then that added challenge of not being able to touch that specific hardware because it's on station, and having to kind of go off of the bits of data that are downlinked and the ground version of hardware that we have in front of us. Another really interesting project that I worked on was the optimizing and automating Wet Lab 2. So Wet Lab 2 is like a series of syringes that are used for sample preparation in order to do RNA extraction, and learning about a little bit of the fluids and how they use geometry to combat bubbles. Bubbles are a big problem up in microgravity, and you really don't want bubbles in your sample because that can disrupt your sample collection. So learning about the ways that they shaped vessels in order to mitigate bubble propagation, I think was really, really fun to work on. And it was also the project that got me interested in designing hardware or maintaining hardware specifically for biological applications. Another question, how did your involvement with the ASGSR student and professional board aid in building your network? What's the biggest differences between volunteering on the student board compared to being on the professional board? So ASGSR, I feel, helped a lot with building my professional network. One, through the conference. So attending the conference and having that link to the industry was really, really valuable. People that work in the industry, I feel like most of the people that I've encountered that do research are passionate about what they do. So they love when you ask them questions. If you attend their talk, definitely take notes. And even if you don't know exactly what questions to ask, because that's something that I struggled with sometimes if it was something outside of my field and I wasn't really sure what to ask, I would write notes about areas that I thought were interesting, and then bring up those areas and say, like, I'm interested in XYZ. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? If I didn't have a specific question in mind. Additionally, through the student board, you can network with the students too. So I did some work with two previous ASGSR student members. They were also part of my internship program, where we got together and decided to try to publish our research findings from our internship. And I think being part of the ASGSR student board and having that contact with them every month really helped facilitate those conversations and helped us, keep each other accountable, and rather than just proposing an idea, but you don't see those people because you don't go to the same university. So we really followed through with it. And it was great to talk to the students and hear about what they were interested in. And one of the previous student board members was interested in rovers. And I ended up being a mentor for the NCAS program. So it was a community college opportunity where students built and programmed lunar rovers and navigated them across a terrain inside of like a competition space. And I wouldn't have heard about that if I, wasn't talking with the other students on the student board about their interests, and I wouldn't have been involved with that if it weren't for her. So networking with the professional board as well as just the students and the student board really helped a lot. And it was a great way to hear about internships and funding opportunities. A lot of the stuff that I learned about in terms of internship opportunities or fellowships or scholarships was through other students talking about applying to them. And through the professional board, it's great because there's people that are PIs, but there's also people that work in the commercial space sector. So you get kind of different perspectives from different areas of the space industry, which I really enjoy. And it's, again, a great way to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on outside of my specific bubble. I think the second part of that question I didn't answer. What are the biggest differences between volunteering on the student board compared to the professional board? Through the student board, it was a little more event focused, whereas with the professional board, it's more resource focused. So my particular part of the professional committee that I'm working on is gathering and helping create a list of internship and funding opportunities, like I previously mentioned. But when I was on the student board, it was more organizing events. And I guess it just kind of depends on which parts of the subcommittees you want to join. But for me particularly, it's been more information gathering and resource gathering on the professional end, whereas on the student end, it was trying to present webinars or organize events. See, check if there's any other questions. Is there a conflict of interest when applying or contacting various organizations and universities? So to clarify for that question, are you asking, is there a conflict of interest when you're actively applying for jobs, or if you've already received a position and then you're contacting other, what exactly is the contacting for? I guess actively applying. Okay. No, I don't believe so. So a conflict of interest would occur if you actively held a position at a certain company and then maybe you're reaching out for information at another company. But if you're just applying to try to get a job or a position at a university, I don't think you should run into any issues with conflict of interest, because you're not representing an organization when you're contacting these other universities. And another question, where do you see your career taking you in the future? So I think in the short term, I really like the work that I'm doing right now. There's a lot of opportunity for growth and a lot of opportunity to jump onto different projects. What's great about the specific niche is that when you're a project engineer, you're not married to one specific branch, and they can assign you to different projects. So in the past, I've been assigned for maybe 3 months to one project that was understaffed or needed extra help on an assignment. So I really like the fact that it's very interdisciplinary. I can expand to other projects if I wanted to. And I get to do a lot of different and get to see a lot of different suites of hardware in my day-to-day. So that part I really like about it, because I feel like I'm constantly learning things, but I definitely do plan to go to grad school. When I first graduated and finished my undergrad degree, I wasn't solid on what type of research I wanted to do. So I felt more comfortable staying in the industry and kind of narrowing that down even further before I tried to pursue an advanced degree. But I think I've reached the point where I'm comfortable in my niche and I figured out what exactly I liked in the industry. So within the next 2 years, I think I'm planning on starting that application process and trying to get into grad school. And the reason why I want to go into grad school is that I do really like building and maintaining hardware and performing this troubleshooting, but I would like to transition into designing future hardware and being more part of the design and experiment, like research and development leg of it, rather than sustaining engineering. And there's that, and then there's also the management route, which I've been tempted by as well. So we'll see. So it could either be pursuing a graduate school to do the research leg, or pursuing graduate school to get experience or more exposure to management skills. Which challenges are you currently learning from in your field now? So right now, one of my projects has issues with its circuitry. And so I did a couple circuitry classes as an undergrad, and I worked on circuits and designing circuits for an internship. But this is a bit more advanced than what my skill set is. So that's one of the challenges that I'm facing right now, is learning more about how the specific hardware was designed, learning more about that specific type of circuitry and the components in that circuitry, and what I can do to help help fix these errors. And we do have dedicated electrical engineers, and it's been great to be able to just sit and talk with them and ask a bunch of questions. So again, that's why I've stuck around with this job, is that there's so many people that you could talk to and so many ways that you can learn. And I'm learning a lot from my coworkers, and I'm learning a lot from my projects, which is fun, because in general, I think learning is fun. What schools are you thinking of applying to? Finishing up my undergrad soon, and it's scary. Yes, it is scary. One of the schools that I'm looking at that I'm particularly interested in, that's pretty popular, is CU Boulder. So the University of Colorado at Boulder. I think they have the most NASA funded projects of all public universities in the United States. So there's a lot going on there in their aerospace department. I visited when I was visiting a friend who attends CU Boulder, and they have all these amazing murals of space, and they have a lot their own little like mission control center there for bioserve. So there's a lot of great space specific opportunities, both in aerospace and the physical science, as well as in life sciences at CU Boulder. So that's at the top of my list as well. For personal reasons, I also wanted to look at universities in California, because that's where my family is. And I had a friend who went through Stanford's aerospace engineering master's program. So that's another one that I was kind of interested in applying to. But there are a lot of space-centric programs. Jordan McKay, who was part of the ASGSR student board, is at Georgia Tech. And they have a really, really good, both for aerospace as well as space life sciences at Georgia Tech. Arizona State has some pretty solid space ties as well. Yeah, I can send you a list if you want to email me, and I can share some of the graduate schools that I've been looking at, because I know there's a lot more. I have a spreadsheet somewhere on my computer, and I could share that with you if you'd like. I think that's it for the questions, unless, oh wait, I think I missed one. How many peer-reviewed publications does one need to be eligible? Are you asking how many peer-reviewed publications you need to get into grad school, or to be eligible for an industry job? Eligibility, okay. So for grad school, I think I've had friends who have only, eligibility for research funding. I'm not sure what the set number would be for eligibility for research funding. I know typically if you're in grad school, you're actively encouraged to publish papers where possible. But yeah, feel free to email me again. I'm not actively applying for research funding with my specific job that I'm doing currently, but there are people that I work with that do apply for research grants quite often, so I can reach out and find that information for you.
I think that is all the questions. Thank you so much for answering them. That was a really good discussion, I feel like.
Yeah, thank you everyone for the questions. I'm glad I could help where I could. And yeah, it was a great discussion.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the fantastic presentation as well.
Thank you.
And if anyone, has any questions, feel free again to email. And also if you want to rewatch this, it will be up on our YouTube relatively soon. So be sure to view that. But thank you again so much to everyone for joining, and thank you, Elizabeth, for talking to us.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you all have a good day.